Hello and welcome to exercise 4 of the SPARC reconstruction of Malfi. So, I have just imported the decimated but normal mapped version of the subsection we were working on in the last video. Now, you may be wondering, where's my normal map? Don't panic. If you press the viewport shading button, it will appear as if by magic. So the level of detail we have here will actually be quite useful when we try out greyboxing. So you may have noticed in exercise 2, this was briefly mentioned, this process of basically trying out how a site would have been laid out based on whatever line of evidence you're trying to use. So in this case, we're obviously using the visible remains of structures on the surface of the site that was recorded with the laser scans. And so greyboxing is very simple. It's mainly using cube primitives. So you know the cube that appears every time you start a new file, more of those. So first off, we need to decide what our wall should look like. So what sort of width are we thinking? What sort of height are we thinking? So if we have a look at our site here, you can see that over here it's a bit more intact. Obviously, as we saw in the interim report, this wall up here was added by Velmin after he had excavated the site, and so that we don't have to worry about that being intact necessarily or factoring that in, because that wouldn't have actually been there. So if we want to have a quick look at sort of the width of the walls, so where do we measure? So these are about 2 here, there's about 2 meters visible here, although if we look at the preliminary report you might find that the external walls would have been a bit wider. So where else do we see structures? That's quite a big question as well. So we might decide that perhaps our primitives should be about 2 meters wide. And as far as height goes, if we remember our interview with Rebecca Worsham, we may want to go for a 1.7 meter high sort of height, or you might want to double that if you want a 2-story structure. So first, let's bring in a cube. And so let's find our cube. So obviously they always put it down here. If you press G as a shortcut, that will allow you to start moving it. And so we'll want to also have snap to vertex enabled, which should make things a bit easier in terms of moving it around. Make sure the little magnet's active. Okay. So one of the important things here is that this does not reflect the real-world coordinates in the actual space. So what you'll want to do is you'll want to go over here, item, transform, and you can see its dimensions technically is at 4 rather than 2. So we do want it at 2 meters width roughly. And for height, we do want that at probably 1.7. And then we'll change, no, that will be our variable. But we want to make sure that this is locked because we want that at a consistent height. And we'll want this at a roughly consistent width for our walls. So while we're in object mode, we'll move this around. You might find that these walls are a little too thick, and you may want to rotate, so the shortcut for that is just pressing the R key, just so you can get it roughly in the correct spot. measurements again. See, that seems like it's more like 1.5 here, so we might change this. And so when you rotate, make sure you're aligned to an axis, which will make movement a bit easier. And so once we're happy with our primitive, we can move into edit mode. So the main combination that you'll be using when greyboxing are extrude, move, and loop cutting. And so the main idea here is to get the greyboxing done so that you can actually get a sense of what the standing structures might have looked like and how that might have influenced movement throughout the site. And, you know, how certain rooms might have functioned, things like that. So extruding, first we'll want to hit the number 3 on your keypad, not on your numpad, because that'll allow you to face select. So we'll select one face that we intend to extrude outwards, and we'll hit E. And so you'll see that we are extruding, and now we will angle ourselves so that we can see how badly it's gone into the depth of the model here. And so now I've hit G while hovering over this lower point, and so now it's allowing me to move that so that it's in contact, just in contact with the mesh itself. And so we might want to extrude this out ever so slightly, maybe even further, just so we can start thinking about what sort of height we want that wall to be. And so we might want to create a loop cut here so that it can travel along the wall properly. And so if we want to highlight our object and hit Control R, it'll allow us to create a loop cut, and you can left click and drag to the point that you want it to be at there, and then left click again, and that will be your loop cut. And so this is me selecting those faces there. So if you hit the F key, much like fill, it will dissolve the boundaries there and fill everything into one sort of face there. And so we can do the same here if we want this to be our wall face, basically. And then of course using G to move things along here. Right. And so that can be our wall there. We might decide that we want this to actually be a bit taller. Oops. Don't want that highlighted, we want this highlighted. And so I've made that one single face there. You can hit extrude, make that as tall as you like, within reason. If you're having trouble and it seems to be jumping, you can hit the control key, hold the control key, and it'll let you control that a bit more finely. Okay, and so where else should we put a wall? So there are quite a few loose stones in here. There is one wall here, so we can probably safely make a wall here. We might want to add a loop cut here and kind of move it along to the point that we think the wall sort of ends. Switch to face select and make that a solid face. Extrude to the point where it seems like it sort of ends, kind of move it along here. And then how are we going to make this? Well, I'm gonna hit R, Control R, sorry. Pull the loop cut along. Click until it's solidified there. Just switch to face select, shift and hold and F, E to extrude. And so this process, it's not holding you to anything really. You can kind of edit this as you go along and say, well, does this match this particularly here? Do I feel like it should go further out? Is this like an internal subdivision? And so it can be a really useful aspect of kind of testing things out archaeologically as well. And so yeah, so that's essentially, well, you can see here already there's a problem. My walls have suddenly grown too tall. And so it might be worth undoing that. Remember, Control Z is your friend. And so I can decide that I should have kept that division there. Extrude, G, or maybe you don't like that, but that's what I'm going to go with for now. 3, E, select, E, there you go. G, get it so it's on top of the model instead of inside below. Make sure this lines up properly. So that is greyboxing, and obviously you can keep going further than this. This is just to introduce you to the basics of greyboxing. And so this can kind of help when you start actually creating assets, deciding how they would have looked, where to place them, where one defined unit of a house would be. I may make a video showing how I created the prehistoric house that takes up the rest of exercise 4. And it's essentially the same basic tools that you're using, so I'll create one anyway. But anyway, see you in the next video.